Okay, welcome everyone. I am just going to say a couple of things and hand it over to the moderator. I want you to know that you've all been muted when you come in, and I hope that you will continue to stay muted. If you do have questions, please put them into the chat box. We are going to be sending out the recording of this session as well as the slides. That'll probably take a couple of days to get it from Zoom and get it out to you, just so you know that. And I'd like to introduce the moderator today. Christina Sachs. Dr. Sachs is the Provost and Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs at Maryland University of Integrative Health. And she is going to introduce our speakers today, and then she will need to jump off, but after a few minutes. So please take it away, Chris.
Okay, thank you very much, Wendy. I'd like to just take a moment to thank MOL for the opportunity for Maryland University of Integrative Health to share some of its unique expertise to support members of the higher education community in Maryland. I have to say that today's presenters are among the best, not just at MUIH, but in the US, to speak about the topic of faculty self-care, especially during these ever-changing and unprecedented times. Bevin and Camille beautifully weave together their experiences as integrative health practitioners and faculty, along with their personal practices of self-care. So it is my pleasure to formally introduce both of them. Bevin Clare is Professor and Program Director of the Master of Science in Clinical Herbal Medicine program at MUIH. She holds a Master of Science in Infectious Disease from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and has studied herbal medicine around the world, blending her knowledge of traditional uses of plants with modern science and contemporary healthcare strategies. She's also the president of the American Herbalists Guild. Camille Freeman is a professor in MUIH's Nutrition and Herbal Medicine Department, where she teaches physiology and pathophysiology online, and she also serves as a faculty fellow in online course development. She holds a doctoral degree in clinical nutrition from MUIH, as well as degrees from Rice University, the Thai Sophia Institute, and Georgetown University. She's also a licensed nutritionist specializing in reproductive health and fertility. Bevin and Camille, take it away. The session is yours. Work your magic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we chose this time because, like many of you, we're juggling a lot of things, and the children seem to be more peaceful in the morning. So it's also just a great time to have a little bit of energy to talk about a topic that is so important. And so today we're going to be taking a look at tending us and tending you, and we will be doing this and try to interact with you as well. So we hope that feel free to be chatty. Go ahead and use that group chat. You have, both Camille and myself will be keeping an eye on it, and we'd love to hear from you. We're not coming from a place of having all of these solutions. We just want to share some things that work for us, that work for our clients, and that we hope will work for you. But we know that you have a lot of things that work for yourself. And towards the end of the presentation, we're going to be especially asking you to share some of those. So today, we're going to hopefully expand your menu of self-care. So for all of us, we have our go-to things. I mean, when things get overwhelming, or even just to prevent things from getting overwhelming, we have what we do. And it's different for all of us, but the idea is to have as many things in that menu as possible, to not just have like your one TV series that is the only thing that will help you to relax. And once that's over, you're done and there's nothing left. So we really want to make sure that you kind of can pepper that with all sorts of options that are appealing. So, as far as a goal that comes out of this, we're hoping that you come away with a few more things to add to your menu. That you're like, yeah, I think that those will work into my busy life, and I can better care for myself. We're also going to be looking at policies, because we realize that it's not just our internal practices that determine our self-care. It has a lot to do with the institutions that we are working in. It has to do with just culture overall. And of course, it has to do with the world at large right now and everything that's happening in it. So we'll be looking at some of the solutions that you have, and I'll be prompting you to share some of those practices that are working for you a little later in the talk. So another welcome and just a thank you for caring about yourself and your community and being here for that reason. It is hard right now to allocate the time to do things. And I feel like I was just reading, I wish I could remember the author that said this, but they were talking about, if somebody knows, please put it in the chat. They were talking about life as about juggling and juggling all these balls. You just have to know which balls are glass and which balls are plastic. And so, knowing which ones you can, because you're going to be dropping balls constantly, which ones you can pick back up and which ones will shatter. And I think right now that's especially life. I mean, I know I see lots of webinars I want to go to, and I just can't fit them all in. So I very much appreciate all of you coming and deciding that this was something that you're going to fit in. So go ahead and pat yourself on the back, and I hope that you find something that will serve yourself and your community today. Nobody knows who said that quote, right? It was a female author who said that quote, but I'll try to find it. So, Camille.
Yes, thank you. My internet is a little unstable.
Yeah, Camille, your internet is not working very well. Do you want to take a minute to try to fix that? It's just weird because we're in the same house. Uh-oh.
Was that
okay. Camille, we can't hear you. So I'll go ahead and chat for a couple minutes, and maybe you can see if you can fix the internet. I'm not sure what's happening for you. Okay. So that was strange. Camille and I are actually physically together right now. Our kids, we're actually currently paying our children a salary to keep themselves busy and not bother us over a few days. So we're actually physically in the same place, so it's a little weird. But anyways, what we were going to talk about with this beautiful cow here is the idea that you're here in a couple of capacities. You're here for listening to what's going to work for you, but also to be able to bring some of this back, because one of the things you want is to create a culture of self-care where caring for yourself and caring for your peers is a fully acceptable thing to do. Not even acceptable, just, actually encouraged. And, for us, we work at the Maryland University of Integrative Health. So I feel like there's a very high awareness of the intense need for care and self-care in all sorts of different types of ways. But that doesn't mean that all universities can't have that same thing. Camille, are you back? That it's working, do you think?
Yes, is that?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, let's give it a shot. All right. So we'll go on to the next portion of our presentation here. And what we wanted to talk about very briefly is just the science of self-care. So Bevin, if you could go to the next slide, that would be awesome. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention before we go any further is that what we're talking about here is not burnout. Burnout is officially categorized by the World Health Organization, and it's considered a syndrome that's related to essentially workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And if you suspect that you have burnout, we would encourage you to seek help in terms of your therapist or primary care practitioner or something along those lines. And just FYI, the symptoms that you're looking for are a feeling of exhaustion or energy depletion, which perhaps many of us are experiencing right now, but in combination with an increased sense of mental distance from your job, that might be negativity or cynicism, as well as a feeling like you're not as productive as you could be or would like to be. And those three things together are really the signs of workplace-related burnout, and you seek some outside help for those. But now to go on to what we do want to talk about today, And the next slide, if you would, Bevin. We want to talk a little bit about a few key concepts that I think are going to be for you. Now, stress, of course, is a big topic, and we're not really going into the theology of stress and so forth. A few interesting pieces of information from the literature would be really relevant for those of us who are trying in this particular moment in time to balance everything that's going on. So the first concept that I wanted to discuss is that of allostatic load. And allostatic load is the idea that everything that we are handling when it comes to the pandemic or an extra teaching load or online for the first time, or our students who are now family being at home, all of these things are added stressors, and the body pays a price for those. And so our allostatic load is essentially the price that the body pays for everything that we're asking from it. That includes physical stressors, environmental stressors, and so forth. And so what we want to start thinking about is, are there ways that we can lower that load in general? And it may be that we can lower it via our work. It may be that we can lower it via self-care practices like the ones we're going to talk about today. And there may be other options as well. So one of the biggest things that we can do and that the literature encourages us to do is to make time for diffuse thinking. Now, some of you may have heard of this before, but many researchers categorize thinking into two different groups. There is focused thinking and there's diffuse thinking. So focused thinking is exactly what it sounds like. You are spending time working on a specific problem, and you are putting all of your mental capacities towards that direction. And focused thinking is really important when we are researchers, when we are scholars, when we are thinking about teaching and so forth. However, focused thinking relies on our neural networks that are already in place. So when you're doing focused thinking, you are building on what's already there. And if you want to think of new ideas or new solutions, creative solutions to either problems related to your research, problems related to your classes, new ideas of things to teach about or research and so forth, what you really need is not so much focused thinking, but you need diffuse thinking, because this is the time when we branch out from the networks that are already formed and start to think about things in new ways. We think about new connections. We have aha moments that we don't usually have in focused thinking. And diffused thinking happens when we are not focused and when we're not sitting down and trying to do it. So diffuse thinking may happen when you're in the shower or on a walk or coloring, doing things like that, when your mind is not working on one specific problem, but you're just sort of turning it over in the back of your mind. So you can think about ways to incorporate diffuse thinking into your life. So when you think about, okay, I need to take some time to go for a walk, that's not just because you need a break, but you can also think about it in terms of, well, actually for my mind to be working as well as it can, and to think about and find solutions to some of the things that are troubling me right now, or some of the things that I'm working on right now, you actually want to make sure that you're building in that time to do this kind of thinking. So please, please, please don't skip the walks, don't skip the breaks, don't skip the times when you're letting your mind wander. And I know for a lot of us, especially parents right now, some of those things are going by the wayside, but ideally we want to keep them in. Another piece that I think is really important, and many of us are struggling with this a lot right now, is to work within your chronotype. So chronotype is essentially your baseline preferred daily rhythm. So it refers to your circadian rhythms, which are the physiological and behavioral patterns that we have on approximately a 24-hour cycle. And we each have a chronotype, meaning if I asked you, if all was perfect in the world and you were at the beach or at the mountains or somewhere where you didn't have any responsibilities, you were totally on your own to do whatever you wanted, and I asked you if you would prefer to get up first thing in the morning and work like an early bird and then go to bed a little bit on the early side, get a good night's sleep and do it all again. Or if you would prefer to stay up till the wee hours of the morning, sleep in late, and then kind of cycle through your days like that, most people probably have a really good idea of where they would naturally fall. And some of us are extreme in one direction or the other. Some of us are more midline type of folks. But either way, our bodies do have inherent rhythms. And when we can start working within those, we will find that everything in our lives goes smoothly. So part of what we do with this is just understanding where your body likes to be. If you know you work better in the morning, work around that, and vice versa. But also, when we're talking about our chronotype and working with circadian rhythms, we've got to look at sleep patterns. And so many of us right now have erratic sleep patterns. We're doing a lot of blue light exposure in the evenings. Our phones, our computers, our TVs, our various devices are all blue light secreting, and that does suppress melatonin. And one of the things that we want to do at the end of the day is have melatonin levels go up. So if you haven't done it already, I really encourage you to put a blue light blocker on any devices that you're using. And better yet, put them away at least an hour before you want to go to bed and let your body start to get tired. It's one of the things that melatonin does for us. When we sleep, we are doing a lot of really important work, both in terms of healing the body, that a lot of our tissue healing happens when we're sleeping, but also we are doing a lot of mental consolidation. We're doing a lot of forgetting of things that we don't need to remember, a lot of letting go of little bits and pieces that are essentially cluttering up our brain. So you can think of sleep as a time to essentially clean up the nervous system, especially the brain. If you're not getting the sleep, everything is going to be harder. So again, prioritizing the sleep, prioritizing your chronotype. One other very small tip I'll throw in here, and this is something that I use a lot with my clients, is that if you're having trouble regulating your sleep, and for various reasons, some of us have anxiety or insomnia, you can have changes associated with perimenopause or other reproductive transitions, pregnancy, and so forth. So if you're having trouble with the sleep, one of the things that you can do to reinforce circadian rhythms is actually to do other things in your days at regular rhythms. So for example, if you eat at regular times, that does help entrain some of your circadian oscillators to get on a rhythm. And that will eventually, in many cases, help with your sleep rhythms as well. So if you find yourself eating just any old time and your sleep is troubling you, see if you can try to eat at a regular time throughout the day. So say I have breakfast about 8 o'clock, I break for lunch around noon, I eat dinner around 6 or whatever works for you. But if you can get some regularity and rhythm there, your body will anticipate what's going to happen. It's able to prepare in advance. And I always tell people this is a little bit like if you were to tell your students that tomorrow we're having an exam that they didn't know about, they would be like, and freak out and try to study. They would have to rearrange their schedules. All kinds of things would have to happen. Whereas if you tell them in 3 weeks, we have an exam, they're able to ideally plan ahead for that, work it into their schedule, and have a kind of a slow and steady preparation. And that's what you want for your body when it comes to food intake and sleep. You want it to know what's coming so that it can prepare well in advance, and the whole thing goes a lot smoother if you do that. Lastly, and this is something I think many of you are probably familiar with, but I wanted to focus on it as well, that the research indicates that we work best if we work in short, focused bursts. A lot of people use the Pomodoro technique, which is a 20 to 25 minute focused session with a 5 or 10 minute break afterwards. I encourage people to do that if you are not already. It's incredibly effective. One of my favorite things to do when it's the end of the semester and we've got the exams and the papers are piling up and you look at them and you're like, gosh, I really need to clean out my spice cabinet. It's been a while since I swept the pantry out. You start to think of all the other things you could do and you've got these tasks looming over you. One of the best ways to tackle them is to say, not I'm going to grade all the papers, but to say I'm going to work on them for 20 minutes or 25 minutes. And then I'm going to take a break and go for a walk or get a glass of water or play with my kids or whatever, and then come back and do another 20-minute chunk. So these task chunks are not directed at finishing a task. You're just going to focus on something, one task for 20 or 25 minutes, take a break, and do another one. And this works incredibly well for staying focused and productive. All right, so Bevin, do we want to go on to the next slide now?
We do. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about course design, and not even, in the, intentional way that you might have initially designed your course, but maybe some things you can leverage right now. And one of the first things I was thinking about is when the pandemic hit, I think a lot of us made some changes in our courses. So we suddenly were like, wow, everyone is overwhelmed. You suddenly started feeling very overwhelmed yourself, and all your students were feeling overwhelmed, and you were mid-trimester or towards the end of the trimester, and realized that if you didn't change something, then you were going to have a lot of students who might be failing. And then also for your own health, like how are you going to keep up with everything that was happening? So I'm curious how many of you did make some changes. I know I made some changes at that moment. And I'm not talking about massive changes, but things like, this course, I don't drop the lowest grade in this course. I'm going to go ahead and implement that right now. Or taking a look at an assignment that seemed like a good idea, but now seems irrelevant. Or like you had we're nutritionists, so it's like students were going to the grocery store, and suddenly you're thinking, gosh, this is no longer fun going to the grocery store and taking a little video or something. So one of the things I'm curious about is how many of you kept those changes the way that you did. I haven't changed most of them back because I realized, hey, it went pretty well in this new slightly lighter way. So course design can be self-care. This can be about taking care of yourself. And those of you who have been teaching for a while probably realize that when you started out, there's all these great ideas of how you were going to design a course and how you were going to teach a course online. And then you realized, oh, this would actually be absolutely amazing if there were either 4 of me or I only needed like 1 hour of sleep a night. But then in reality, what you actually needed to do to take care of yourself and be accountable for your students was also to be a little bit more creative with how you designed things. So I've put a few ideas up there, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I'm going to tell you about some of the things that's working for me. I use a lot of audio visual options to grade and to give feedback for students. And I find that it actually takes me less time to click that add video button and to give a little bit of a narrative feedback. This obviously doesn't work for everything, but we use Canvas at MUIH, and so I can just click in there and talk to students about what's happening. And I think that seeing a face, I know I really love seeing their faces when they are in there, and I get to see their humanness, and they get to see my humanness. It makes you feel a lot more connected, and I think it just makes you feel less isolated. And so I really try to do a lot of those options when I can, whether it's using audio or video. And if the thing that's holding you back is that things aren't fancy with whatever you're doing, I wouldn't worry about it. I find that students really don't care. And if they see you in a hoodie when you're giving them weekly feedback, I think that that's absolutely fine. If I'm doing webinars or things that are a little bit more, or that are more public, then I'm definitely thinking about my my appearance much more. But otherwise, I would say, get in there and just like talk to your students. And both Camille and I use Flipgrid in our courses, which is a great way. That's very easy for students to check in with you using their own video, and you can respond video, and it's very fun. And I think it has a lot of appeal to people who are more tech oriented, perhaps younger students. And check out Flipgrid. There's a lot of integrations for different LMS, and once you get it started, it's really easy to use. Another thing that I like to do is to think a little bit more carefully about how I'm doing feedback. Like if I'm trying to make sure I respond to every student, sometimes I might create a schedule of which students I'll give extensive feedback, and they know, that they're going to be getting more extensive faculty feedback every 3 weeks on what they're working on, and then I rotate through that. They wouldn't know which weeks those were. Also, leveraging peer feedback is something that I do a lot of. Again, that's really nice for not feeling isolated. So using whatever peer review functionality your LMS has, if you have that, is really nice because they get to hear from multiple people. And I appreciate when I'm grading and giving feedback, I can see the peer feedback, which gives me some really nice jumping off points. So another thing is incorporating play. I think Camille and I both spend a lot of time doing this in our classes. Last night we were brainstorming for a upcoming assessment that she's working on, and things that were coming up were like, maybe they could create, she suggested creating a playlist. And keep in mind, this is a person who's teaching about physiology and chemistry and so on, but creating a playlist and explaining why exactly that music represents certain concepts. Having students play in their kitchens or around their house and finding something that represents a concept that you're discussing. I have students making a lot of things and experiencing what their reactions are to them when they take them and so on. So, making it a little bit fun and a little bit playful and real, and, letting students feel like not everything has to be APA cited and formatted and so on, because they're obviously getting a lot of that. So throwing in some things where they can just play with the concepts and what's happening for them. So it can also be nice for people who, if they can incorporate, it's a little easier to incorporate family if they're struggling with family life balance. So pacing assignments is nothing new, but sometimes it's about spreading things out even more, making things a little bit more doable. If students were struggling with deadlines all the time to get in your 10 different steps of a major assignment over 10 weeks, maybe, see if you can scrap a couple of them and stretch a couple of them out over 2 weeks. And so, I mean, for me, a lot of times it's about a check-in that when I sit down, either when I sit down to grade something and I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do this. And so for me, it's checking in, is this really valuable for the students? Like, did they either learn an immense amount from this, or did they really enjoy it? And then, I'll press on. But sometimes I'm just thinking, they probably hated this and I didn't really like it either. How could I do this differently? What could I do that might make it fun and exciting for both of us to be doing this? How could this become a lot more inspiring and engaging and just interesting in general? So that's something I think a lot about, and I think there's a lot of ways to do this. Is that we want to make sure that we have rigorous standards in our programs, but that doesn't mean we can't also humanize things and allow flexibility, allow repeat submissions, allow just a different way of going about things. And the last thing is something I use in a lot of my courses, which is to leverage student leadership. I have, in my course design, I have student leads in a lot of weeks. And what those students are responsible for doing certain things that I might otherwise be doing. And they're things that they get a lot of learning from. So for example, if I'm working on a case study and I want to make sure that that they are asking really good questions about this case study and looking at the biomedical information around that case study. So I could spend the time to kind of tease out those questions, but I assign a student to do that. It's their lead. They look at and assign these questions. They send them to their peers. I have other times where the lead person is presenting something and moderating the discussion, and I'm in there a little bit more like a peer. So I think this works well in higher education. Where this is a master's degree program, so it may work better in those situations, but especially if you have multiple lead students, it gives them a chance to demonstrate leadership and engagement, and it can lighten your workload for sure. So those are some of the things when I think about course design. And as we get towards a little later in this discussion, it would be great to hear some things that you've found have really helped in your courses, to hear about the things that you might have changed during, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, to assist students, and just how course design, how you've used this to help with your own self-care and also that of your students.
All right. Thanks, Bevin. One of the things that I appreciate about the pandemic and being forced to sort of cut back on some things in our classes in an unexpected way is that in some cases I found that cutting things out was actually quite beneficial, and that having a little bit more room and a little bit maybe fewer requirements actually seemed to really help the learning process for the students. And I think sometimes we do feel pressured to include more and more and more and many more assessments and more tasks and more control. And I do think sometimes when we let go of that a little bit, we allow the space for learning, and people really do step into that. And that's been a real positive learning for me. So next we're going to talk about a few day-to-day wellness practices that we recommend. So if you could go to the next slide, that would be Bevin. Thank you. So the first thing, and this is especially important now that we're all at home and working from environments that perhaps are not optimized for, and look at your physical environment. A lot of us have been doing along the way, but one of the things I'd ask you to look around wherever you're working now and see if there's anything living nearby. So if you have a plant perhaps in your area, or have a pet or anything like that, I think it's unless that thing happens to be a small child, in which case it's perhaps nice but not very helpful. But we do recommend getting yourself a little potted plant. There's many that grow in low light conditions if you don't have an office window, but you, of course, you have more flexibility. Just having a plant can be quite helpful for your mental state and just reminding you that there is life outside of work sometimes. But also get yourself a chair that's comfortable. Get yourself a desk setup that's comfortable so that you're not killing your back, your wrists, your arms, and so forth. So it may be worth investing in some options. Money is tight. There are lots of cardboard box related types of things you can do in terms of moving your monitor up and down and so forth. But anything that you can do to make yourself a little bit more comfortable is helpful. The other thing that I know is that many of us are sitting quite a lot these days, and that is normal for our structural health, nor for mental health, I would argue. So one of the things I love about the Pomodoro talking about before is that you can use it as a prompt to get up and move your body at the end of each 20 to 25 minute segment. I work with clients on fertility and subsequently get a lot of clients. And one of the things that we encourage our clients to do in both of those is to get up and move. So I have people set a timer. To go off on their phone at least an hour if they're not moving that much already. So you can ask your Google or your Siri or whoever to just remind you to move. If you have a Fitbit or an activity tracker, sometimes they will nudge you, but it's really important to actually listen, to get up and move your body. And even something as simple as going down the hall and back again, going downstairs to get a glass of water, anything like that can be really helpful. So please, please, please make sure you don't have to do necessarily a full exercise regimen, although that's always nice, but making sure that you are moving is helpful. Next, find a task management system that works for you. These are something that I think many of us have played around with, but having things written down gets it out of your brain so that you can focus on other things. So if you've constantly got that I need to list running in your head, it really is taking up space that you could use other ways. So I encourage you, even if it's writing things down on an old envelope, or maybe you have a super fancy practice task management system that you've invested in and that you pay money for, but have something to where you can get things out of your head so that you're not having to remember all the little bits and pieces. Have some kind of coordinated option. So I know Bevin likes to use Todoist as a task management system. I just have a plain old free app on my phone that lets me make a list and check things off when it's done. And I also like the back of the envelope method. And yes, absolutely, Bevin has commented that you for sure are allowed to write things off after they're done so that you can cross them off later. That's absolutely acceptable. In fact, encouraged. And then lastly, it is really hard, I know, to make time for extra things right now. And of us, mindfulness, reflection, journaling, meditation, those are some of the things that we have had to set aside when time gets tough. Those are often the first things to go. There's only so many things that people can do at a time. And as healthy and whole, intact as possible during this time. So even if you can only take 5 minutes to do something that involves self-reflection or mindfulness, it will be beneficial and it will add up. I really encourage you to look at one of the apps such as Calm or Headspace. There's a free one called Insight Timer, and these all have guided mindfulness practices. Many of them are just a few minutes long. You can do a 5-minute, a 10-minute meditation. Some of them even have 30-second breathing practices. And those can be incredibly helpful even if you've just got a few minutes between meetings. So if you can work something in that is giving you a small break that rather than wearing you down, these things will pay off. So don't start out ambitious and say you're going to meditate for 30 minutes at 4:30 every morning. If you can do that, great. But maybe you're just saying, I'm going to do a 5-minute guided practice on YouTube in between meeting A and meeting B. And that's add up over time. The small steps add up. So you're not doing enough. That something needs to be big and dramatic in order to make a difference. All right, Bevin, I'm going to take it from here.
Camille had mentioned that, it's hard to, a lot of the things that have slipped away are like that time to go to yoga or that time to meditate. And one thing you are probably still doing is eating on a regular basis. At least I hope you are. And I think that that has become a really complicated, different thing for a lot of us, maybe in some good ways and maybe in some bad ways. I mean, I know that I have, since the pandemic started, I have a lot more control over what I'm eating because I'm just home a lot more. And yet at the same time, that isn't necessarily always a good thing. Those of you with kids that are making like at least 14 meals a day know what I'm talking about. So, but there's a lot of opportunities when we look at food and fuel as self-care, and especially as nutritionists, thinking about, what does this really look like? Some simple things that I want to add, and I don't want to add things to your menu that you're like, oh, groan. I want to add things that actually feel really good. But I think we can think a little bit out of the box right now with what we're doing. Breakfast, I think, is one of the most fun things to experiment with, because so much of breakfast, what was breakfast for a lot of us, was dictated by getting out the door. And that's not an element right now. So there's some fun things you can do with breakfast. I think, if you want to, you can get really ambitious. I mean, you can make it so that breakfast is like the most interesting meal of your day, and by dinner you're just going to have a snack. Heck, you can have some scrambled eggs and toast or something for your dinner, but at breakfast you can really get ambitious if you want to. And there's really no rules with breakfast too. We tend to have like foods that are breakfast foods and foods that aren't, but no one knows. And if they do, they don't care whether you're eating those particular foods. So you can get a little wild with breakfast, and breakfast can be more like lunch or dinner. It can be whatever you wish. I like the idea of making a kind of a breakfast plate that you can nibble on for a while. And you don't have to like make breakfast, sit down and eat it. You can make some food, and especially if you're working online, well, it's nice to go and eat. You can do that, but you can also kind of have little healthy nibbles that your breakfast consists of over many hours. It depends on what your rhythms are, and this is something Camille Camille mentioned, and both her and I are morning people, so we wake up and we're hungry and we're ready to go, but by evening it's like there's not as many productive moments, and that comes down to food too. So thinking about how it would go with experimenting with that. One of the nice things that I like to think about also for food and fuel is coming into some kind of routine. So that could mean that it's actually advantageous for you to think about what you eat every Monday, every Thursday, every Friday, if that's the kind of person that you are, that you like that type of routine. If that's not your thing, and you actually like to shake it up and you feel like it's getting too boring, I subscribe to the New York Times what to cook this week, and that's open access and free. And so what they do is they have these like weekday dinners every week, that they give you 5 weekday dinners, and they try to make them not overly complicated. Oh, there definitely are some that are a little bit more complicated, but they're all really interesting, and they tend to meet every type of food um, limitation that you might have, dietary restriction, and if you just pick one. So I try to pick one every week, like get that list, and I look and I'm like, oh, I'm going to try this interesting recipe. So try to make it kind of fun. As far as snacks go, I think that thinking ahead for snacks, we used to probably grab a lot of snacks out or open them out of the drawer of our desk or something, but we don't need to do that. You can plan on snacks. So you can think about prepping those snacks in the morning, cutting up a lot of veggies and fruit, especially if snack sometime is like you just running over and grabbing something while you're not talking about a slide in your webinar, or you're waiting for something to load or upload or something. So you can think about some of these really sensible snacks, like do some smoothie prep ahead of time, or smoothie pops. You can make a lot of tea and iced tea. I love bringing a pot of tea over to my desk while I'm working, and just drinking hot tea is so wonderful to do that. When we talk about considering alternatives to caffeine, you don't need to do this. Like that, if you like caffeine and that's working well for you, awesome. I just had my Earl Grey tea this morning, very happy with that. But if you find that, anxiety levels are high, or it's difficult to calm down and sleep, or you're not moving as much as you used to be, and that caffeine isn't really like getting burned off in the same way, or you just want to try something different to see how it supports your health and your own self-care, you can consider some alternatives to caffeine. And there's lots of them. I mean, there's everything from switching to one of the wonderful quote coffee substitutes, which many of them can stand on their own, like Ticino or Dandy Blend. Those are both really delicious things to try. You can also think about something that's just kind of invigorating, like peppermint. I always think the mints are really lovely in the morning to have a nice steaming cup of peppermint tea. And you could do broth. If you want to wake up and do something different, you could try even like a salty or spicy broth. Could work out for some people really well in the morning. I mean, soup is a classic breakfast in many places in the world, and those are generally savory, and they're often have a lot of spice and flavor, and that can be so warming and cozy and light. And I absolutely love soups for breakfast, and they're just kind of like this magical elixir in the morning time. Another option to think about as an alternative to caffeine is to think about what it would be like if you just didn't have anything stimulating. So it might sound counterintuitive, but waking up and drinking something calming like chamomile tea can actually be really a nice way to start your day. You might find that you just approach things in a different way. And also, because we're both herbalists, thinking about if there's herbs and dietary supplements that you really like. There's plenty of research and data out there on certain herbs and dietary supplements improving cognition or easing anxiety. One of the top ones that comes to mind is holy basil. There's a lot of good research out there, and you can find Tulsi tea all over the place, but it definitely shows that it helps with reduced reaction time and ability to concentrate. So research around holy basil or Tulsi is pretty compelling as far as giving it a try and adding it into your day. I also think there's this wonderful herbal supplement that comes, it doesn't come in a capsule usually or a tea, it comes in a bar, and it's called chocolate. And that is as a therapeutic can be really wonderful, and it's tasty. It's, you know, it's a little bit invigorating. There's really a lot of positives, particularly in dark chocolate. So if you haven't been treating yourself to some dark chocolate, you might want to think about starting that dark chocolate. And another one that I would recommend is an herb called ashwagandha, which is our most commonly used herb in our program at MUIH. And you can look again at the peer-reviewed literature and some of the information online, but it's a safe herbal supplement to use if you're not pregnant, and it is really helpful for people who find that they're they feel like they're burning up all of their energy in anxiety or worry or stress, and that's making them exhausted. So it's a little bit invigorating and calming at the same time. It also has been shown in the literature to help support healthy sleep, which is a great way. So, you know, there's all those self-care things that, you know, between food and breathing and sleep and sunlight, those are all free and available for most of us. Yeah, so I see some fans of chocolate out there, and also another vote for the what to cook this week from New York Times. Definitely worth getting. It makes me hungry, though, is the only problem. I look at it and I'm like, oh, I wish somebody was cooking this for me this week. So we wanted to take, you know, most of these things we've been talking about so far are things that you need to do to take care of yourself, or at least things that you need to observe and kind of practice. But it's not always like that. Sometimes there are, you have the autonomy to do a lot of these things potentially, and maybe you have that because you're lucky enough to teach online, which does make it so that you know, can take some of the stretchiness. You have some of the stretchiness in your day to think about your environment and so on. If you're working behind a counter as a clerk, you can't really think about your work environment so much. So we're lucky in that way, but it also depends on our institutions and what that looks like. So I don't know how many of you are you know, are feeling like with what's happening in the world right now, you're just fine and good. But I know for many of us, it's very overwhelming. I have 2 small children at home. They're pretty demanding. Trying to figure out what work and life is like is really challenging. And one of the things that's made the biggest difference is working at an institution who has always been very understanding. And a few weeks ago, I received an email from HR that I think that had the subject line, you know, best practices for remote work. And my stomach actually sank when I saw that. I just thought, oh no, you know, I'm going to look at this and maybe it's going to say like, all employees should be online from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. with only brief necessary breaks or something like that. And I was just, you know, no, I'm trying to balance this and I've got things that are working and I'm doing everything I need to, but I need to do it my own way. But I had nothing to fear. And when I looked at the policies that I saw, I was it actually just made me cry. And so I'm going to share some of those policies, not because I work, you know, not because I want to say that MUIH is doing this better than anyone else, but I haven't seen anybody else's that are like this. And so if you look at this, their policies in a very different way. I mean, I'll read the first one. We understand that while working at home, interruptions may happen. Will not make people feel bad or self-conscious about interruptions. That is a very big thing. Those of you who have interruptions at your home, having people not, you know, take the stance of, oh gosh, you know, they're probably with their children again or something. But when when you're in a meeting, like I was yesterday, and a kid comes up with a bloody part of their body, you need to stop for a couple minutes and take care of it. And knowing that that's actually an adopted culture of your workplace, that we understand this. And it's the same idea of people are guests in our homes, that we are in our homes. We don't have to pretend. I mean, I pretend that I'm in a field because I don't want you to see the headboard of the bed behind me right now, but you know, we do this. The university has meeting-free Fridays, which is something that was implemented prior to the pandemic, but also the idea that, you know, we're balancing this. And we're doing a lot of things that if you are homeschooling and assisting children and you know, you need to block out different times, that they will strive to respect that. And I, you know, being a parent and telling people that I can only meet between the hours of 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. or something, you know, I've found people so willing to work around the schedules as needed. And so, you know, that type of, it feels like love to me, you know, when a university or a workplace can create that. But it also, I think, encourages employees to work harder, to feel like, wow, I'm getting trusted in this in so many ways that I'm going to make sure I'm doing the best job as I can, versus I am not feeling taken care of and I just don't have the time and energy to make sure I'm doing my best, because they're not doing their best for me. So, you know, I think that we really, we have a lot of possibilities in our institutions right now to do this and to create these cultures of self-care and to create these possibilities. So I was supposed to remind you while I was doing the last slide that this is a great time to tell us what's working for you. What are some self-care practices that you have put in place? We want to hear from you in the chats. I mean, are you making sure you eat chocolate every day? Are you taking a bath? My husband bought some like foot massager thing that goes under his desk that he, you know, has it massage his feet and it's all heated and I really want it right now. While he's working, you know, what kind of things are you doing that are taking care of yourself? Are you looking out a window? Are you breathing? Are you taking a moment? And so please add in those things. It's also great if your workplace is contributing to your health in a certain way, that they're, you know, adding in useful policies, that there are ways that you feel understood. These are things, you know, that you can bring back. But let's hear from some of you about some of the things that are working really well for you and how that's going. So please, you know, go ahead and add that in, and Camille is going to take a look at some of those and maybe add in some others. And I see one already that I also do, whether it's at really weird times. I am making sure that I'm doing some of these things as well.
Yeah, so we've got some great suggestions in the chat here, where Mary Ellen says building time to walk outside every day, and Lori is saying rearranging her studio and office to have a full view of the trees outside. I love that. What a great idea. Something very simple. I'd imagine it makes a big difference. And Tom says using a timer while grading papers, 30 minutes, then getting up to move. Yes, I love that. I find that especially at the end of the trimester, that makes such a big difference for me. Frashina says moved workspace every couple weeks. Oh, I like that. Get some variety in where you're working and get a little bit of a change of scenery. What a great idea. Decluttering the desk. Another great idea. I need to work on that when I get back home. My desk tends to mount things up, but it does. It's so nice to have a clean workspace. Wendy says reserve at least 20 minutes first thing in the morning for pleasure reading. Oh, what a great idea. Bevin and I were just talking this morning about how pleasure reading is one of the things that I've had to cut way back on since the pandemic started. These are such wonderful suggestions and very, very small things that can just get us through these days that we're navigating somehow. It seems like there's so much going on. One of the things that I've been making an effort to do is actually reminding my students to do some of these things. So if I'm recording a lecture video or feedback to an assignment or something, I try at the very end, I try to encourage the students to take a little bit of a break at the end and say, well, you know, don't forget to get up and get a drink of water and take a break from the computer for a while and then come back. So I'm also trying to encourage my students, or at least set an example that it's okay and we're not expecting them to sit there and stare at the screen the whole time. Any other ideas or suggestions for things that are working? And then the next question that I have for you is, was there anything that we mentioned today that you're not already doing that you would like to start doing? Whether it's just a very small thing, such as perhaps eating more chocolate. You can say that 2 nutritionists informed you that you should be eating more chocolate, perhaps, or down to, you know, could you create a policy at your university to support multiple faculty or students? Are there anything else that you might like to apply to your own situation? We'd love to hear about that in the chat as well, if you have something that stuck out at you or a place where you'd like to share. And while we're waiting for any ideas, Bevin, did you have any other final words? I know we're almost at the end of our time together here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing is just to treat yourself gently, you know, especially right now, and try to be, you know, understanding of yourself, and do your best, but know that your students are human and you're human and they know that. And, you know, being kind to each other and being understanding right now, I think is so very important. And so, you know, that makes a lot of sense. And I also see Lori added in about, you know, the boundaries piece. And yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting time for boundaries, isn't it? Where, I mean, physically and mentally and emotionally and all of those pieces.
Yeah, Mary Ellen's pointing out that there was an interesting article in the Post on psychological first aid. That might be helpful. So we'll have to check that one out. Thank you for sharing that. But yes, boundaries. I think boundaries also not just in the space that in which we're working, but also in our work invading our home space in some ways, that we need to also remember that we have to turn off the work sometimes, and setting some clear times when you are not working is something I think a practice many of us could benefit from. So I'd encourage people to look at that as well, to have, even though you're working from home, or many of us are, to have times where you're not working and have them be really clear where you actually really are not working. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope that some of this was helpful and that you were able to walk away with a few things, or at least some reinforcement for the things that you're already doing that are supporting you or serving you at this time.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, I want to thank both our speakers today. You guys were awesome. I wrote down my notes of things that I'm going to try to incorporate in my daily routine. Again, we'll be sending the link to the recording and the slides to you all. Thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of the day.